Welcome, dear viewers of the Web of Knowledge. Here where history unfolds each day, we unearth the darkest secrets and rawest truths of those consumed by power. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like if this journey into the past shakes you to your core. Prepare yourselves, for today we will unveil the story of one of history's most iconic monarchs, a queen whose image of glory and eternity hid a body scarred by disease in the relentless passage of time. What secrets were concealed beneath layers of makeup and eloquent speeches? How far did a queen go to maintain the illusion of her own perfection as her flesh withered? Can the brilliance of a crown hide the imperfections of skin marked by smallpox? Or the splendor of a reign conceal the ravages of a toothless mouth and an old age that refused to be seen? What happens when a woman whose vanity was as great as her intellect fights a silent battle against her own body, inexorably succumbing to decay? If this tale of horror and the physical disintegration of a symbol grips you as it does us, don't hesitate to share in the comments where you're joining us from on this journey, and which other figure you'd like us to pull from the shadows of oblivion. Your requests are our next stories. Now close your eyes for a moment and imagine not the magnificence of a glorious queen, but the shadows of her chambers where dim light hid sores and wigs concealed baldness. Imagine the whispers of the court, not of flattery, but of murmurs about a monarch who insisted on dancing 6 galliards with a weakened body, a figure clinging to youth as old age consumed her. This is the story, the drama, and the slow decay of Elizabeth, or Martyrs of England, the Virgin Queen, whom time, despite her efforts, could not forgive. The queen consumed by time, the true story of Elizabeth III of England. In the 16th century, few events caused as much upheaval as the birth of a mere baby, as was the case with Elizabeth Tudor. On September 7, 1533, between 3 and 4 in the afternoon at Greenwich Palace, a girl destined for the crown was born. This was Elizabeth, daughter of King Henry VIII, and his second wife, Anne Boleyn. Her birth, however, was a bitter blow to her parents, who had desperately hoped for a male heir to secure the Tudor dynasty. All the royal physicians and astrologers, save one, had predicted a boy, and the French king had even been asked to be the godfather. The disappointment was so palpable that the planned jousting tournaments were canceled, and the letters announcing the joyful event were hurriedly altered, adding an S to the word prince to make it princess. Elizabeth's childhood was, from her earliest years, a roller coaster of highs and lows, marked by political instability and personal trauma. She spent her first weeks in the royal nurseries, cared for by her wet nurse and attendants. At 3 months, she was given her own household, and on a cold December afternoon in 1533, she was carried in procession through the streets of London, escorted by her great-uncle, the Duke of Norfolk. Yet the security of her position crumbled as quickly as it had been built. Just 2.5 years after her birth, Elizabeth's life was irrevocably altered by her mother's fall from grace. Anne Boleyn, after 2 miscarriages, lost Henry's favor. In January 1536, Anne suffered her final miscarriage, and that same month, Catherine of Aragon, Henry's first wife, died. With Catherine's death, the king's Catholic critics considered him a widower, free to remarry, opening the door to a new marriage untainted by the specter of bigamy. Henry, already eyeing Jane Seymour, disposed of Anne Boleyn, who was arrested accused of a litany of crimes including incest and conspiracy to murder the king, and executed on May 19, 1536. Elizabeth, not yet 3 years old, found herself in the same position as her half-sister Mary, declared illegitimate. Most Europeans and English considered Mary the rightful heir, and for many Elizabeth was merely the king's illegitimate daughter. Derogatory rumors about her mother's infidelity already circulated, suggesting the solemn red-headed girl was not Henry's child after all. Despite this, Henry VIII always acknowledged her as his own, and took pride in her intellectual achievements. The trauma of her mother's execution and the uncertainty of her own position deeply marked Elizabeth. No one knows who told her what happened or how she felt, but her household descended into chaos. Her half-sister Mary, stripped of her title as Princess of Wales, was sent to live at Hatfield with Elizabeth, but refused to acknowledge the newborn as a princess. Mary's unhappiness and obstinacy were disruptive elements in Elizabeth's early childhood. It is said that Anne Boleyn had instructed the household's ladies to slap Mary whenever she refused to perform tasks related to her sister's care. Henry VIII, in his efforts to secure Anne and Elizabeth's positions, had subjected Mary to suffering she would never forgive, causing Elizabeth to question the nature of royal marriage. In 1543, Henry married his sixth and final wife, Catherine Parr, who exerted significant influence over Elizabeth. Catherine leaned toward Protestantism, though she outwardly adhered to Henry's Catholic faith, likely shaping Elizabeth's own religious stance. Elizabeth thrived under her care, receiving an education as rigorous as any legitimate prince's. By age 12, she could translate religious and classical works, demonstrating genuine love and aptitude for her studies. Her mind showed no feminine weaknesses, and her perseverance matched that of any man. However, after her father's death in 1547, the next decade would be the most dangerous of her life. Elizabeth moved to the household of Catherine Parr, now married to Thomas Seymour, brother of Lord Protector Somerset and uncle to the young King Edward VI. Thomas Seymour, a handsome, charming, and highly ambitious man with poor political instincts, began engaging in inappropriate games with the 14-year-old Elizabeth. He was seen entering her room in his nightshirt, tickling her and slapping her buttocks. Elizabeth, with little experience with men, felt both flattered and frightened by his attention. Catherine Parr, instead of confronting her husband, occasionally joined in these games, even holding Elizabeth while he cut her black dress into pieces. This situation, now recognized as sexual abuse, caused an emotional crisis for Elizabeth that some historians believe affected her for life. In 1548, Elizabeth was sent away from Catherine Parr's household, supposedly for the Queen's health. Though they exchanged affectionate letters, they never saw each other again. After Catherine's death in childbirth, Thomas Seymour renewed his attention toward Elizabeth, intending to marry her. The court suspected his ambitions, and Seymour was arrested for conspiracy. Elizabeth was rigorously interrogated, but showed remarkable composure and intelligence, refusing to admit anything incriminating. She protected her loyal servants and asserted her complete innocence, demonstrating her formidable intellect and determination. The stress of this ordeal, though outwardly handled with poise, affected her physical health. She lost weight and became prone to headaches and stomach issues. Thomas Seymour was executed in March 1549. During the reign of her half-brother Edward Sigismundus, Elizabeth maintained extreme caution and intelligence qualities that helped her survive. She dressed modestly in simple black or white gowns, projecting an image of chastity and humility, distancing herself from Mary, a typical Catholic princess who wore the brightest, most extravagant attire she could afford. With Edward VI's death in 1553 and the failed attempt by John Dudley to place Lady Jane Grey on the throne, Mary I, a devout Catholic, ascended to power. The relationship between the sisters was tense. Mary had always disliked Elizabeth, primarily for her cunning and lack of religious zeal. Mary blamed Anne Boleyn for her own mother's tragic end and the loss of her father's affection. Despite this emotional hostility, Mary, in her moment of triumph, was willing to be conciliatory. Elizabeth rode alongside her in her triumphal entry into London. The contrast between them was stark. Mary, at 37, looked older than her years, small and thin like her mother, with a deep, almost harsh voice. Elizabeth, at 19, was taller, slender, and dressed with striking severity. However, the political climate soon turned dangerous for Elizabeth. Mary's marriage to Philip II of Spain was unpopular, and her religious policies, which reintroduced heresy laws and sanctioned the burning of nearly 300 Protestants, earned her the nickname Bloody Mary. Elizabeth, the only alternative to Mary's rule, was constantly under suspicion. When Thomas Wyatt's rebellion broke out in January 1554, though Elizabeth denied any involvement, she was arrested and taken to the Tower of London. The journey to the Tower was agonizing. The mere mention of the Tower shattered her already fragile nerves. She begged to enter through a different gate than the Traitor's Gate, but her request was denied. Upon stepping onto the landing, she declared, "Here lands as true a subject being prisoner as ever landed at these stairs. Before thee, O God, I speak it, having no other friend but thee alone." Her terror was palpable. She was taken to the bell tower, a small corner tower. Her room, though not as harsh or uncomfortable as she feared, was still the Tower of London, and she was a prisoner. Elizabeth spent only 2 months there, but they were months of anguish and fear of death. She believed she would be poisoned, knowing Mary hated her, and that many of her advisors pushed for her execution. Lady Jane Grey, the 9-day queen, and her husband had already been executed there. The stress further impacted her health, causing weight loss, headaches, and stomach issues. It was the imminent arrival of Philip II of Spain to marry Mary that saved her, as Philip was sensitive to the political implications and feared that harming Elizabeth would make his arrival in England even more unpopular. With Philip's encouragement, Mary, eager to please him, released Elizabeth on May 19, 1554. Elizabeth, still terrified, spent the night praying, believing she would die. She was confined to Woodstock, a hunting lodge where, though not officially under arrest, she lived in a nebulous position that confused nearly everyone. The ordeal of smallpox, the true mark on the Virgin Queen. In the early years of her reign, Elizabeth established herself as a shrewd and pragmatic monarch, crafting the image of the Virgin Queen as a brilliant political strategy. This concept allowed her to avoid the dangers of a foreign marriage that had alienated her sister Mary, and the rivalries a marriage to a subject might spark in court. She projected an image of vigor and stability, the Gloriana her people would come to adore, a near-divine figure rising above human weaknesses. Yet behind this carefully constructed facade lay the reality of a fragile body, already marked by the traumas of childhood and youth. On October 10, 1562, Elizabeth's illusion of invulnerability was shattered in the most brutal way. The Queen felt unwell, and according to her courtiers, foolishly took a bath, a practice believed at the time to weaken the body and make it susceptible to infections. Within days, the terrible truth became evident. She had contracted smallpox, a disfiguring and deadly disease. The initial symptoms were terrifying fever, weakness, and loss of speech. To the court's horror, the characteristic smallpox pustules had not yet appeared, a sign that led her physicians to believe death was inevitable. The palace descended into chaos. The Privy Council met hurriedly, tormented by one question: if the Queen died, who would succeed? Her Mary, Queen of Scots, was the obvious candidate by blood, but her Catholicism and ties to France made her unappealing to Elizabeth's ministers. Panic was palpable. Amid this crisis, a German physician, Dr. Burkhardt, at the urging of the Queen's maternal cousin, Henry Carey, Lord Hunsdon, intervened. Burkhardt wrapped the unconscious Elizabeth in red flannel and placed her near a fire. After 2 hours, the Queen miraculously awoke and regained her speech. Her advisors were admitted to her bedside and immediately pressed her to name a successor. To their horror, she refused, instead requesting that Robert Dudley be appointed protector of the realm. Despite her advisors' concerns, the Queen gradually recovered. By October 25th, she was well enough to attend to state matters, though her face was still inflamed and scabbed, and she remained out of public view. Within a week, the smallpox had subsided, leaving her seemingly unscarred, a remarkably fortunate escape. However, though the visible scars on her face were not as severe as feared, the disease left an indelible mark on Elizabeth's psyche and body. Smallpox left her partially bald, reliant on wigs and cosmetics. From then on, her image became an obsession. The use of heavy white lead and mercury-based makeup, common at the time, was necessary to cover skin imperfections and discoloration, though these cosmetics were toxic and contributed to the long-term deterioration of her complexion. The Queen, already slender, began to appear even more fragile beneath these layers of artifice. Her love for sweets and fear of dentists led to severe tooth decay and loss, to the point that foreign ambassadors struggled to understand her speech. André Hureau, a French ambassador, noted during an audience that her teeth are very yellow and unequal, and on the left side less than on the right. Many of them are missing, so one cannot understand her easily when she speaks quickly. This not only affected her speech, but revealed the oral decay that signaled aging and illness. Aging and the crumbling mass decay on the throne. As Elizabeth aged, the gap between her public image and the reality of her body widened. Her portraits, painted under strict royal guidelines, became increasingly unrealistic, resembling enigmatic icons that made her appear far younger than she was. They projected the image of Belle Phoebe or Astrea, and after the victory over the Spanish Armada, as Gloriana, the eternally youthful fairy queen. This creation of a powerful image was crucial for a woman ruling in a man's world, a vanity that was more propaganda than mere coquetry. Yet reality intruded. As Walter Raleigh observed, Elizabeth was a lady whom time had surprised. The final decade of her reign was marked by growing melancholy and physical deterioration that could no longer be fully concealed. In the autumn of 1602, a series of deaths among her close friends, particularly that of Catherine Carey, Countess of Nottingham, her niece and intimate friend who had served her for nearly 45 years, plunged Elizabeth into deep depression. The Countess's death in February 1603 was a breaking point for Elizabeth's mental state. The queen who loved her dearly mourned her loss, profoundly sinking into a deep melancholy from which she never recovered. Though frail, depressed, and nearly 70 years old, the queen retained her stubbornness and authority. She refused to rest standing for hours on end. When Robert Cecil, her chief minister, told her she must go to bed, she snapped, "Must is not a word to use to princes. Little man, you know I must die, and that makes you so presumptuous." Despite her attendants' persuasion, the aging queen would not yield. Perhaps she dreaded her imminent death, or fought against visions of her frail body that tormented her. During these uneasy final days, she seemed disorganized and disordered, possibly plagued by guilt and regret. A lady-in-waiting, Elizabeth Southwell, reported that the queen was tormented by visions and that toward the end of her life, a playing card with a nail driven through it was found on her chair. The queen refused to leave her chambers, consumed by sadness. William Camden, a chronicler of the time, noted some of her physical and psychological symptoms as her end approached. Her tonsils swelled, though the swelling quickly subsided, but her appetite soon failed and she refused the medicines offered to her. She descended into a silent, motionless state, refusing to eat or lie down, standing in her chamber for up to 15 hours at a time. Her poor health, combined with a delirious and depressed mental state, hastened her death. After near constant persuasion by Lord Admiral Charles Howard, she finally agreed to retire to bed. Soon after, as the queen lay senseless in bed, the elderly Archbishop Whitgift was instructed to pray at her bedside for her immortal soul. Curiously, it is said that during this period, Elizabeth also requested that her coronation ring symbolizing her marriage to England, and warned since her coronation be filed off her finger as the flesh had grown over it. This act, a harbinger of her imminent death, signified the physical removal of the ring, ending her contractual obligation to the country and her symbolic marriage to it. Death and legacy, the final act of the consumed queen. The government's ministers gathered at her bedside, needing to know whom she would choose as her successor. Elizabeth could no longer speak, but when asked if she wished James VI of Scotland to inherit the crown, she reportedly gestured with her hands, drawing a circle around her head to indicate a crown confirming her desire. She died on March 24, 1603 at Richmond Palace between 2 and 3 a.m. Chronicler John Clapham wrote about 1 o'clock. Her Majesty departed this life mildly, like a lamb, easily, like a ripe apple from the tree. Yet Elizabeth's death was surrounded by macabre rumors, fueled by perceptions of her decaying body. One popular belief was that she died of blood poisoning, possibly from the toxic lead-based makeup she used, which could cause death if applied continuously to the skin. Another theory suggests cancer, which may have developed in her final year. Others speculate a simple bronchial infection that turned into pneumonia given her advanced age and weakened immune system. None of her physicians could determine a direct cause of death, as she refused examination and no autopsy was performed. Regardless, her death was hastened by her poor mental health, severe depression, and melancholy, which led to her isolation. Even after death, Elizabeth's body remained a subject of speculation and horror. Elizabeth Southwell, a lady-in-waiting, claimed the corpse was so full of noxious vapors that it exploded in its coffin, describing a loud crack as the body and head burst open due to the pressure of gases released during decomposition, a grotesque detail. Though Southwell's reliability is questionable, as she converted to Catholicism, soon after her account contributed to the imagery of a queen whose body decayed terrifyingly. On April 28th, just over a month after her death, Elizabeth's body was carried in a grand procession through King Street to Westminster Abbey for burial. Chronicler John Stowe wrote that Westminster was filled with crowds of all kinds in streets, houses, windows, and gutters who came to see the obsequies. When they saw her effigy lying on the coffin, there was such a general sighing, groaning, and weeping, as the like hath not been seen or known in the memory of man. Elizabeth's body was initially placed in the vault of her grandparents Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. In 1607, her coffin was moved to the same tomb as her half-sister Mary. The Latin inscription on their tomb reads, "Consorts in realm and tomb, here we sleep, Elizabeth and Mary sisters, in hope of resurrection." It is a final irony uniting in death two women divided by life, faith, and politics. In the 1880s, Arthur Stanley, during an inspection permitted by Queen Victoria, found Elizabeth's tomb. He noted that the central wood at the head of the upper coffin had collapsed and some sides were crumbling, tearing away part of the decayed lid. Though the coffin itself revealed no more, this detail of a rotting coffin reinforces the perception of inevitable decay. Elizabeth I's reign was idealized posthumously, especially in the 17th century, as a golden age. She was hailed as the Protestant heroine, Gloriana the Virgin Queen, who defeated the Spanish Armada and led England to its zenith. However, recent history has taken a more complex view. Elizabeth, though brilliant and cunning, was cautious in foreign policy, and her military tactics in Ireland tarnished her record. She lived with the specter of death and illegitimacy since her mother's execution. Her body, despite efforts to project eternal youth and vigor, was like any mortal's prey to time and disease, smallpox scars, tooth loss, baldness, and the delusions of old age. All were part of a silent battle fought beneath the armor of her royal dignity. Her vanity, which drove her obsession with image, was not mere caprice, but propaganda, a creation of a powerful image in a world that doubted a woman's ability to rule. Elizabeth I's story is a grim reminder that neither the most absolute power nor the sharpest mind can halt the slow, cruel decay of the flesh. The Virgin Queen Gloriana was in the end a woman consumed by illness and loneliness, a body that fought until its last breath against inevitable decay. In her tomb beside her sister lies the echo of a life that, despite all efforts to conceal it, bore the visible marks of a personal ordeal.